Welcome to this edition of SAU Magazine, a weekly program featuring news, profiles, sports, commentary, interviews, and special events, all coming to you from the campus of Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.
Good morning. This is the KSAU report. My name is Anyta McDonald.
And I'm Julia Marty.
And today we're here to speak with Dr. Rankin, who is, forgive me if I don't pronounce this properly, Puterbaugh Professor of Free Enterprise.
That's correct.
Okay. Could you explain the title? It's a new title for me.
Well, we had the Puterbaugh family. Mr. J.G. Puterbaugh was one of the founders of McAllister Fuel Company, and they had an office here in Magnolia. So his foundation has made a contribution to SAU to promote the better understanding of free enterprise economics. And so that's how the Puterbaugh Professorship was first established.
And so you are the first inductee?
Yes.
To the title?
First professor, that's right.
That's very interesting. When did this come about?
It came about, this is the first year, so I've just completed my first year as Puterbaugh Professor, and it was established really about 6 years ago, and it took a while for the fund to build up to where it would be a fully established or endowed professorship. So it took about 6 years.
Now, would there be any other professors being endowed to this?
We hope so. This is the first one on the SAU campus, but we hope it'll establish a precedent, and we can go to other donors and say, wouldn't you like to also have your name on an endowed professorship? And it could be in any area, education, science,
and
music.
What would the criteria be to become an inductee?
Probably to obviously be very interested in and accomplished in a particular area. I would say that we might actually hire people in from the outside in a certain area. So if someone wanted to do research, say in chemistry or something like that, we might have people apply for that position, say we're going to have an endowed professorship in chemistry. Here's what it would be like. Here are the classes that would be taught. Here's the research you would do. Would you like to apply? And you could have personnel from on the campus and off the campus apply and then select just like you would for a regular faculty position.
We understand that you've recently come from Russia on a trip to Russia. Can you tell us something about your trip?
Well, I had a fascinating trip to Russia in November of this past year, so that'd be November of '91. Mm-hmm. And what happened, the University of Central Arkansas was preparing or sponsoring a tour to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and they had some extra spaces. So they contacted one of the faculty members down here, Mr. David Sixby, and said, do you have anyone that you think would like to go from down here? And he mentioned my name since I was working in free enterprise, and because of the change in the economy over there, they asked me if I'd like to go. I said, absolutely. So that's how it occurred, and then the university sponsored my trip, paid for my airfare.
How long did the trip last?
We were there 12 days, and we were there, interestingly enough, over the anniversary of the Russian Revolution. Now remember, this was after the coup. The coup
this summer.
This summer in August, and this was in November. So we already had a real outbreak of freedom in the Soviet Union.
Well, did you have to do any special preparations for this trip? Any type of research or anything like that?
Most of what I did was a little bit of language, and the Russian languages I found to be very difficult. So as you say, "Здравствуйте," if you could just say hello in Russian, that was a big step. For "Пожалуйста," which took forever to learn, and please, and just a few of the basic things was mainly what I did in preparation.
Right.
Go ahead.
What was your most memorable experience while there?
I think walking into Red Square for the first time. We did that at night. We had arrived late into Moscow, and we decided to go down to Red Square, so we took the bus down there, and just opening the bus door and walking out into Red Square in the evening, to me, was fabulous, because that is something we have seen in pictures and read about all our life, and Lenin's tomb and the Kremlin walls. To me, that was just a fabulous experience to be able to walk in Red Square.
How many people were along on this trip?
There were 11 of us that went.
Were they across the Arkansas state, or was it across the U.S.?
Across Arkansas. We had some from the University of Arkansas, SAU, of course, the University of Central Arkansas. We had some from Winrock International. We had some stockbrokers, so it was a cross-section of faculty and business people.
Now, did you all stay with a host family, or did the colleges provide and prearranged housing units for you?
We stayed at Moscow Pedagogical State University in a dormitory and it was not a very good dormitory. It was pretty run down, but it was adequate. It was warm, but it appeared to be ancient, even though it had only been built about 10 years ago. But we were actually on one of the university campuses.
Now, what type of culture shock, aside from living in a dorm, what other culture shock did you experience?
The biggest thing that occurred to me was how gray and dull everything was. It just wasn't colorful at all. We're used to color. I was never so glad to see Chicago when we got back to Chicago. And Chicago is not known as just a colorful city, but everything looked so colorful and nice compared to Moscow. And it was very gray and dull. And the weather also, I found, was the sun hardly ever was out at all. And so that was kind of had a depressing impact on us. Of course, we were there at almost the beginning of winter.
Well, Russia pretty much is above the region that we call the Great Lakes here in the United States. Was it pretty cold there?
Pretty cold. Now, it was not awful, but in the evenings when those shapkas, those big hats that they put on, those were really nice. They keep your head warm. And if you really got wimpy, most of the Muscovites would not pull those flaps down unless it was dark. Nobody could see them. But they would wear those shapkas with their ears sticking out. But when the wind started really blowing, it was cold. But now we were just there before winter. Winter started on December the 5th, so I can't imagine what it'd be like in January.
Now, that surprises me that you said that it was depressing, because some of the pictures, I mean, not all, but there are some pictures that has the big, beautiful architect, and it just seems like the colors and stuff portrayed in it, and now that you're saying it was really depressing, it's almost, to me, as a culture shock just listening to that. Is there any explanation to that, or is it just someone taking bad pictures?
No, most of the exciting architecture is pre-Russian Revolution, and the architecture after the Russian Revolution is grim, like all of the buildings that Stalin built, big gray monolithic type structures with red lights on the top and a red star on the steeple and things like that. So if you wanted to really look at the pretty architecture, it was pre-revolution. Also, I think the Soviet Union is much prettier in the spring and the summer when there's some grass. Because during the winter, there's no trees, no leaves, anything. I mean, no leaves or grass or anything like that. It's grim.
Well, do you think the architecture sort of portrays the feeling of the people after Stalin got into office, grim? Anything like do you think that has anything to do with it?
I think so. The people, particularly the older Russians, all dressed the same. They'd have on a black hat and a gray coat, and that was just standard, very drab, nondescript. I think Russians really didn't want to call attention to themselves. They would really just now getting used to looking at people. And we would say, how do you recognize us as being Americans? And they'd say, well, it's really not your dress. It's the way you walk around. You're looking people in the eye. And they said we Russians were very careful about calling attention to ourselves. So we'd just go around, we'd look down in front of us, and we'd just go right on down the street. Because if you created problems, you might go to camp, which is sent to Siberia. So the Russians were very, very careful about not calling attention to themselves through their dress. So very drab. The younger people now dressed as you are in red and dark, brighter colors. You could pick them out.
Now, did they walk the same way as, looking down and not trying to call any attention, or are they a little more bolder because of the youth generation?
Well, obviously they're more outgoing now, because some of the people who went with us in November who had been the year before said they noticed a noticeable difference between the Russian people, more willing to talk and visit and looking up and looking around. Just there's a total different atmosphere now.
You mentioned the Red Square. Was there any other places aside from the Red Square that you visited?
We went to St. Petersburg, and of course that was Leningrad, and it was interesting. I was visiting with the family there, a Russian family, in their home, and I mentioned that we had been to Leningrad, and the gentleman said, St. Petersburg. And so it went from the Soviet name back to the pre-revolution name of St. Petersburg. He was very proud of the fact they had changed the name. St. Petersburg is beautiful, and there was a tremendous amount of architecture. As you know, that was the headquarters of Peter the Great, and the Winter Palace, and the Hermitage, and Peter and Paul Fortress, and all of that. So I found St. Petersburg more attractive and exciting than I did Moscow.
Was it a little hard to, or shall I say, retranslate some of the names that we've grown up with, and now with this revelation occurring and the new names, did you find it a little confusing at times?
Yes.
SAU Magazine is a production of broadcast journalism students in the Department of Theater and Mass Communication at Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.